I'm now thrilled to bring up to the stage Ravi Ahuja. Ravi is Sony Pictures Chairman of Sony Pictures Entertainment's Chairman of Global Television Studios and Corporate Development. Oh, he's here, leading, leading.
I don't wait.
Domestic and international relations. That's why he's got the job he has. Nonfiction, game shows, and kids, and the studio's India business. He also oversees SPE's corporate development and M&A, along with Chairman and CEO Tony Vinciquerra. Welcome, Ravi.
Thank you.
Nice to see you. Yeah, we'll hug it out.
Yeah.
I'll still ask you hard questions. Don't worry.
Okay,
Can we
good.
switch?
I expect
no,
it.
switch.
Switch?
Yeah,
Okay.
switchy. Thank you.
We're very well
I hear
prepared.
better on this here. Your first time at the grill.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank
Welcome.
you. Thank you.
We won't go easy on you though. Don't worry.
No, don't.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that's most interesting about Sony is that you don't really have a major streaming service, right? And so you've picked a different strategy, which in the parlance of the day we call being an arms dealer, right?
Right.
Because you're making shows for everybody to distribute. Why did Sony pick that strategy, and is that working?
Yeah, so I mean, that's absolutely right. We have a very big studio. Some of the top shows that Cole just put up there are ours, right? Like The Night Agent and The Last of Us.
Oh, nice. Two of them.
Yeah, make note of that.
Yeah.
And many others. We make 200 shows or so in our studios. So that's our traditional arms dealer business.
Can you guys hear
call
me,
it that.
by the way?
Can you hear me?
I turn them up a little
There's
bit.
a bunch of people from Sony here who all know that that this is an issue, is hearing Ravi. So I'll speak up.
Okay. we can all just turn you up. We have the technology.
Yeah, turn me up. So we make 200 shows in our studios business.
I never have that problem, by the way.
So that's scripted, unscripted, kids, game shows. It's a global group, so it's a lot of shows that we make. And you're right, we don't have a general entertainment streaming service. And that was a design by choice. And it was largely driven by looking at the landscape and saying, there are just too many of these, and this is not a really good business decision, and we won't be adding anything by being another streamer. So our whole focus is...
That means if you can't be Netflix, don't play.
Netflix and the rest, right? Don't do that, right? Now, we have focused streaming services like Crunchyroll, right, which is anime focused and is big and profitable and all of that, but it's not general entertainment. So the shows that we make in our studio, we make for others. So The Night Agent is obviously for Netflix, and Last of Us is for HBO. We make for broadcasters, Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, 90 Day Fiancé for TLC. So we make a whole host of different shows, but for others. And it's served us very well so far. It's been really good to be focused. The clarity of mission, the clarity of focus allows us to deploy resources in a way that we think is very efficient and creatively excellent. So that's been the strategy, and so far it's been good.
But you didn't set that strategy, right? You
I
joined
didn't
the
set that
company. You
strategy.
came from Disney, which is all in on streaming strategy.
Correct. I came from Disney, and I was attracted to that strategy,
Oh,
actually.
really?
Yes.
That was one of the things that...
Yeah,
Tell
so
us your
I
thinking.
left Disney. I was at Disney 2 years. As my kids say, I was traded to Disney in the Fox deal. So I was at Fox for 14 years, but then I was at Disney for 2 years. And there, you know, the catalyst that brought me to Sony was that ill-fated reorganization that created a distribution organization. It changed my role at the same time.
That got totally undone 18
Yeah, it
months
got
later.
totally undone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. We could take a lot of time on that. But then at Sony, I was very attracted to what Sony was up to. Sony was making lots of great shows. I knew, because I was on the buy side at Disney, that there were a lot of great things coming from Sony. There was an opening. Mike Hopkins, my longtime colleague, had left Sony for Amazon, and thus the opportunity came along. I'd worked with Tony before, so it was a great thing. I got lucky.
But what, in your mind, you're thinking, you could think that's too narrow, that's too limiting, and it's not on the cutting edge of where the business models are changing for entertainment. So, but you thought
I didn't.
the opposite,
No,
right?
I think generally there's a lot of value in zigging when others zag,
Right.
of doing things differently.
Right.
I mean, there are, 10 general entertainment streaming services? Do you need an 11th? Do you need to be one of those 10?
Well,
even?
do you think all of those 10 will survive?
Not sure about that, and I'm not sure that they'll shut down. I think what we're seeing is a rationalization, you know, of some bundling that's happening within the services, and I think ultimately
Inside one company, you're saying?
inside
So
one
well,
company
yeah.
with Disney, but I think we're going to see bundling by platforms, by Amazon, by YouTube, by Apple, by Roku.
Across competing
across
companies.
competing, yes. And that's already started too. I mean, many of the Paramount Plus subscribers, for example, come from those channels programs and many others. It's a more customer-friendly, efficient way.
So basically cable, like
Through streaming.
the internet.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
if you look at television around the world, right, there's always a bundle of some sort.
Right.
It's not all individual a la carte services.
Mm-hmm.
So there'll be a lot of value in putting together the experience for customers. I think when I talk to groups and when we talk about it, the hardest thing is now is what should I watch? Where do I find it? All these services cost too much.
Right.
Right, some sort of platform bundling is the way to address that
Who would you
problem.
see kind of making common cause in a bundle?
In terms of the streamers with
Streamers.
platforms? I think the smaller streamers will opt into bundles first.
Right.
And they already are,
Right.
right? So you're seeing that all over the place.
So like
They'll-
Peacock, you mean? With,
Yeah, I mean, they bundle in with Comcast, so they'll bundle with others.
Well, they're owned by Comcast.
Exactly, so
that's-
they'll bundle with others. I think the Spectrum Disney deal is interesting,
Right.
right? Where Disney is bundling through Spectrum, its linear channels and its
Right.
ad tiers. And so I think it's a customer-friendly way of approaching the business, and it's better for the streamers. The hardest thing now for them is profitability, having a more efficient model.
Yeah.
So spending as much as they do on marketing, right, because they have to manage churn or to acquire subscribers, and even having as many big shows as they do is economically very challenging. So I do think we're going to see that. I think it's going to take time. I think we're in the middle of a 20-year evolution from, coaxial cable and satellite delivered television to IP delivered television.
Where in that 20 years?
I think we're a little
space
past
are
the
we?
middle.
Little past the middle?
Yeah,
I
I
would have
think-
said the same.
I think it evolves through this decade.
And
Right.
so that by 2030,
It's all
that's a
streaming.
weird thing to say out loud. That-
Yeah, it's all
Presuming we're all
streaming.
still here, it's all streaming and there's
Is-
no more cable.
I think ultimately, yeah, I do.
Okay.
Now, a lot of people said there'd be no TV stations and things like that in the 1980s and 90s, and they're still very much around. So it could
Well,
be
I
wrong.
think that does pose actually, it's not our topic today, but
Yeah.
it should be because it does suggest there will be nowhere for local news to play. Not that local television news is such a
It's
great source of community and information actually.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's something.
Yes. Yes.
So that goes away.
It'll become less. I mean, you'll see a version of it that I think will emerge in streaming because if there's demand for it, it'll show up. I just don't know exactly what that's going to look like.
So wherever that shakes out, Sony's in a good position because you're just a supplier. I don't
Well,
mean just, but I mean you're a supplier rather than a distributor.
More specifically, so our core is film and television production, right? That's the core of what we do. But we do find areas to lead in, whether it's anime or in India, where we have a very big business and we're in the middle of a merger to become the biggest.
So I want to talk about India in a moment.
Yeah.
Talk about anime a little bit. Crunchyroll, which is a huge success.
Yep.
And I guess it has competitors, but I don't really know much
It's really
about
the
them.
strongest. I mean, you've got Netflix and Hulu and others that have anime.
Yeah,
but it's the focused
late.
anime provider, right?
Right.
And we have a studio in Japan, Aniplex, that's one of the suppliers, and my colleague Keith Lagoy here oversees that. I can call on people for some of these questions.
You're free to do. You're free as a bird.
But yeah, Crunchyroll is a very strong offering. It provides a really solid community for anime
How many
fans.
subscribers does that have now?
I think we say it. I think it's over
Scott?
12 million. It's
Thank
over
you.
12 million.
12
Yeah.
million. Okay.
Yeah. So, and it's
That's
global.
for a niche that's really strong.
It's global, right?
Yeah.
And it does e-commerce, it sells manga books, it has games, so it's a community of a lot more.
Let's go back to choosing to be an arms dealer or a creator. So your shows include shows like Better Call Saul, The Crown, Jeopardy, Wheel of lots of non-scripted TV, Wheel of Fortune,
Yep.
Shark Tank's your show,
Yep,
right?
yep.
Fantastic. And you have, I want to just call it out, you said you have 54 Emmy nominations?
54 Emmy nominations.
Yeah,
That was our
congrats.
highest
We
ever.
can give them a round of applause for that.
Three.
That's really cool.
Yeah, thank you. 3 Best Drama nominations, which is
Three what?
3 Best Drama nominations.
Which
right?
are Better
The
Call-
Crown, Better Call
Saul.
Saul, Last of Us.
And Last of Us, that's great.
Yeah.
Will there be Emmys, though? Oh, just kidding. There will be Emmys.
That's a better question. Yeah, there will.
Okay, but there are risks to choosing that strategy,
Yeah, there
right?
are.
Because you're dependent on selling the show, or you're dependent on, and then also explain, as we're talking about residuals for the
Yeah.
talent, as the producer, are you a profit participant in this, or it's just you buy a show and that's it?
We produce the show with
Right.
our creators, right? So we are the owner of the show, we're the owner of the IP, and we license to the streamer.
Right.
So all of this very much does affect us, and actually the biggest challenge to our strategy right now is the pullback in streaming, right? Which I think everybody has probably kind of felt or
Yeah.
has experienced even before the strike.
Right.
So that's the greatest challenge. What that does is it puts a priority on us to just keep elevating our game. Right, is stronger creative excellence. That's why we're particularly proud of the 54 Emmy nominations. Being better at producing, better at execution, bringing shows in on time, and that's the focus of all of us very much. Right, is streamers have to feel like we add value. Otherwise, they can buy a show from their own internal studio.
Right.
Right, so we know that, and that puts a tremendous focus on us.
And tremendous pressure. So how? Yeah. So your business has had pressure on it already because of there is a drop in production or less spending anyway.
Yeah.
Pretty much all the big streamers have announced that they have cut the budgets.
Yes.
Right, for
Yeah,
streaming.
we're seeing it, we're feeling it. It's a little harder to get a show over the finish line, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily impact. If we feel really strongly about a show, we still feel like we can find the right home. We haven't gotten to the point of like we look at or hope we don't get to a point of we have a show and we love it and we can't find a home. So we haven't experienced that. Our bet really is that focus and really getting the execution right and having creative excellence will be fine.
So I'm going to ask you, this is a grill-like question, which is when you don't have all those other components of, or you're focused on it as a distribution studio, and being the size you are and being somewhat limited in your growth opportunities because you're tied to whatever the market's doing in terms of sales, doesn't that make Sony a good acquisition target?
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that. It's just our parent company, I think, has no desire to sell us. I mean, they've publicly stated that. And
About a million times, but
yeah, they've owned us for 30-some years through some really challenging times, famously.
Right.
So I'd like to think when the hack, and
hack,
then
right.
go back to the 90s and their early years of ownership. But now things are going well, and Sony itself is on very strong footing. I mean,
but it is a bit, the studio is a bit of an outlier. In other words, I believe,
agree.
yeah, I mean, I think Sony's strategy was to kind of integrate it into its core business, and that doesn't really, never really happened. You'd be a wonderful add-on to Apple, for example.
Yeah. If I were them, if I were sitting at Apple, I would say I'd love to buy Sony. But as far as I know, we're not for sale.
Well, you run M&A, so
no,
perhaps
we're not.
you would know.
We're not. Yeah, I would know, I think.
Yeah.
But I did work at Fox, and I was kind of surprised by that one too. So I don't know anything these days, right? But Sharon, on one thing about synergy within Sony, there's been a lot of progress toward that, right? I mean, if you look at Last of Us and Uncharted and all the shows that we're doing with PlayStation, that's really working. And we're doing the same thing now. We don't have anything to announce yet, but with Sony Music as well. So organically, this isn't like a corporate initiative that's you must do this. I mean, at corporate, there's a desire to do it, but nobody's saying you must have 4 projects, right? But organically, it's working fairly well. So I think for the first time, we're starting to see that work across the entertainment units within Sony.
Interesting. Are you bullish, bearish on how streaming gets sorted out as a business model?
I am concerned about the next couple of years. Over the long term, I'm bullish.
Okay,
Right.
say more.
So if you look at even over the last 5 or 10 years, we were looking at this data the other day at the office. If you look at the revenue in the business, it's grown steadily at 4 or 5% a year. So for all the challenges in the media business right now, the revenue has grown. Profit, however, has gone down 30 to 40% across all the media companies.
Right. Past 5 years?
In the past 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
Well, actually, since maybe 2015, 16,
Oh, even
something
more,
like
so
that.
that's 8
So the
years.
last 8 years, when the industry really had its peak profits. So what's going on, right? It's a tremendous amount of spending to acquire subscribers, and I think that land grab phase is over, right? So I think
The peak
yeah.
streaming or peak TV.
Yeah, but I don't think it's going to go back to where it was before. I think you'll see a little bit of the air coming out of the balloon. That will probably be painful for most companies over the next couple of years. I think after that, though, I mean, the
Well,
fact
does
that,
that, when you say that's painful, that means more job losses? Because there's been so many job
gosh,
losses
I
in the
hope
past
not.
18 months.
I know, there have been so many. I hope not. Hopefully most of the big companies are done with that or close to done with that.
Well-
I do think there'll be a pullback in the amount of content and certainly in the amount of
Right.
marketing.
The number of shows and the amount of the marketing, money spent on marketing.
Yes, and
Okay.
I think the portfolio of shows may shift a bit away from the really big subscriber acquiring swings and to more shows like The Night Agent, right, which was on the screen when Cole was
Is
talking.
Hulu is one of the places that you make shows for, or no?
Yeah,
So what's your take on what happens to Hulu?
I think Disney will end up owning it. I think that's the most likely outcome. But again, all these corporate questions, after my Fox experience, I don't know.
How well, how was it? Did that took you by surprise?
Yeah, that was surprising. I didn't, like all the people who worked at Fox back then, we didn't think the Murdochs were going to sell. But they did, so it's...
Well, do you looking back on it, is there a precipitating event that you think led to that decision? Because I think most of us would have felt, even those who don't work there, but who've observed Rupert, who's always been
Yeah.
an acquirer and not a seller,
Yeah.
where that the worm turned, something happened. Was it like Disney Plus launching, and he's like, okay, I can't do Disney Plus?
And the success of Netflix. I think, one thing about Rupert is he just sees around corners.
Yeah.
And I think he felt that, like, compete or don't.
What do you think happens to Fox? I know, just
Don't
idle
know.
question.
I mean, there's a lot of different
With Lachlan
ideas.
running it.
I don't know. I'm not close enough to Fox now to know, but I mean, I think the prevailing thought is that at some point it gets sold, but, I don't know. I could see it either way. I could see it remerged with News Corp, even though they didn't do that.
Do you think there's such a vast number of executives in the business, including you, who started their careers and learned in this very dynamic environment that was Fox over 30 years?
Yeah.
And there are some who now feel that they regret that they did that because Fox News has become such a big toxic presence in our society, in our politics. Do you ever wonder about that, or think that?
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, when I was at Fox, it was a very large company, and we obviously weren't a part of that. That was the Roger
Right.
Ailes New York-centric thing.
Right.
And I used to always think I know a lot less about Fox News and know maybe one or two people there than I do of any competitor in LA. So it was always a very separate thing. And I think at that time, those of us who worked at Fox just didn't really have any connection to it.
Right.
Maybe that's different now. It's a smaller company.
Well, it's a smaller company, and
Yeah.
it's so much of the profit is driven by
Yeah.
Fox News.
Yeah.
So I do wonder about that. And it's funny because, like, when I'm out in the world and people know, regular people from our hometown of Cleveland,
Yes.
we're both from Cleveland. How about
We're
that?
from like the same couple of blocks.
We're staying the same couple of blocks in Cleveland, which is great. Yes, exactly, which is so cool. We discovered
Yeah.
randomly. But they say they don't make a difference between somebody who is contributing to Fox and somebody who's at Fox News. To them, it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if there are so many executives who are quite liberal, actually, who now question whether did I help contribute to the creation of
Right.
this
Right.
really toxic force.
Yeah. I can see that. It had already been created when I was there, so
True.
it was doing its thing.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about India. Tell us about Sony's television's investment in India and why you're there and this merger that's happening.
Yeah, so we've been in India 24 years, so a good long time. We have a really strong and very profitable business in India. We were the number 4 player, and just when we look around, like I was talking about before, we look for places we can lead, where we can lead profitably, where we can build a winning business. We entered into about 2 years ago a deal to merge with the number 2 player in the market, Z Media, and we've gone through a really long regulatory approval. We were warned back then it was going to take a long time, long regulatory approval process. We just got our last approval a month and a half ago, and we're hopefully going to close within the next couple of months.
And how many subscribers will you have together once that's done?
Well, we have, so this is where we have a streaming service that has over 30 million subscribers in India. And by the way, the streaming services frequently bundle. and with telecom services and others.
Okay.
So in that market, you actually see that, what I was talking about for the US market. So we have over 30 million subscribers. We're merging with Z, which has a service itself and has over 10 million subscribers. The two companies.
What is Disney's?
Disney
streaming
now has 40 million, I want to say.
so you'll be about the same size as Disney.
Yeah, they were up at about 60 until they lost one of the key cricket packages. Now keep in mind, these subscriber numbers sound huge, but the ARPU, right, the revenue per user in India is much smaller because it's a poor country.
Like a buck?
Under a buck.
Under a buck.
Per month, yeah.
Right.
So they're relatively inexpensive. But the bet on India is that it's the fastest growing economy and that it's very young, right? The average age in the country is 28 versus over 40 in the United States and over 50
How
in
well do you
Japan.
know India? Because you grew up in Cleveland.
I grew up in Cleveland and I was born in Tennessee. It's a little embarrassing because I'm Indian, of Indian descent. I have an Indian name and I go there and I can't speak the language. But I do know the bad words. And as I tell them,
You
I
can
know.
try out a couple here. I don't know if
know.
you'll recognize them.
A few people might. So I do. So I tell them, I know when you're talking badly about me. So it's been really interesting. I had never, at Fox and other places, I hadn't had oversight over and involvement and really in a material way in Indian business. So it's been interesting. On a personal level, I feel like I culturally understand it a little, but not a ton. I'd never want to overestimate my knowledge of it because, then you get into trouble.
But your parents were born in India,
My
right?
parents, yeah. My mother, though, grew up in Africa, but she's of Indian descent.
Right.
So that provided even a further disconnection from
Do you
India.
spend a lot of time over in India now working on
No.
this deal?
Yeah, from every couple of months.
You better learn Hindi then,
I
man.
know.
Okay.
They speak English. That's the good thing.
Let me just ask you overall before we have to wrap.
Yeah.
Would you say that your perspective on the entertainment industry as a whole and some of these bigger issues we're talking about, this sort of changing business models and the whole functioning of the ecosystem just really being at a critical inflection point and maybe not one where there's an easy path forward, would you say that you're optimistic, pessimistic, you see a light at the end of the tunnel, or are you thinking it's just going to be a slog till we figure it out?
Again, optimistic over time. I do see a light at the end of the tunnel. The content that's being made, I think the satisfaction people have in the shows they watch, just what Cole showed before,
Yeah.
is very high. I think as an industry, though, we kind of wrecked our business model in the attempt to transition or to solve customer problems. And I think
Could that have been, was that avoidable, do you think?
you could argue that, but these things are always messy. I mean, look, I think in 2040, we're going to look back at this time and we're going to say, oh, that was like really...
I'll be 100 years old.
Well, at the Grill 35
Grill
or whatever.
35, yeah.
It's going to be like, oh, wow, that was really simple. Television just transitioned from one form of delivery to the other. But when you live through history... there's a lot that happens, right?
Yeah.
Everything that's going on with the guilds and profit participations, what kinds of shows are popular, the way we consume, all these things are in flux. So many things are changing, and living through that is challenging, but I'm optimistic that over time, it's going to work out, and the models will develop in a positive way.
And you think Sony's going to stick with this strategy of being primarily a content creator?
Yes, but not religiously. I mean, it's a strategy, it's a business strategy, so it could change if circumstances change.
Well, certainly the film side does distribute, but
Yes.
yeah.
Yes, so it could change if circumstances change, but for now, I think for the foreseeable future, our strategy is exactly what it is.
Nose to the grindstone, making
Yeah.
shows.
Do a good job, right?
Do a good job. All right,
Exactly.
cool. All right, Ravi Ahuja, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining
Thanks,
us.
Sharon. Thanks.
Thanks, Zach.
Yeah.